Next, I'd like to introduce Stewart Palmen. Stewart is the town and county councillor for this area, and he's going to talk for a few minutes about his perspective on Brexit. Stewart Palmen.
Hello. First, it's fantastic to see a debate like this going on in Trowbridge and in my ward, in the central ward for Trowbridge. I'm really pleased to see so many people turning up today. Now, I was going to use my 5 minutes to go through looking at the local effects that Brexit is likely to have on the council and economy, etc. But I've already covered that pretty well when we had a similar debate in Bradford on Avon a while ago, and it's available on YouTube. So I'm not going to do that again. What I'm going to do instead, while I was promoting this event, I talked to a reporter from the Wiltshire Times who's here, and I was explaining how we're going to look at facts, we're going to look at everything very rationally and discuss things that are purely fact-led. And he pointed out that, that people's decisions have not really been led by facts, but making an emotional decision on something is not necessarily the wrong thing to do. And it got me thinking, so my initial reaction was, no, we've got to base everything on rational analysis. But on something as complex as this, a lot of the public are not putting in huge amounts of time and research to verify everything. They are having to make a decision on a relatively small amount of information and taglines and so on. So I looked at myself and thought, right, if I was just making an emotional decision, what would it be? And I look back, and so I'm going to give you a bit of background about me you might not know. My father's Finnish. He came over in the 1930s and lived up in Hull with his father as a young boy and went through the Second World War. And I don't know if you know Finland's history in the Second World War, but Finland were being attacked by Russia and lost quite a lot of territory to Russia and fought the Russians. They ended up effectively siding with the Germans to fight off the Russians once the Russians joined the Allies. And at that point, England declared war on Finland. And my father and my grandfather were both flown from the centre of London to Berlin, right in the middle of the Second World War. And then he spent an evacuation period in Sweden, came back to the UK after all this was over, no hard feelings or anything, and took himself through university, paid for it all himself, because he was a foreigner, he wasn't British at that stage, and ended up with a good job in South West Electricity Board. And he brought us up. By the time I was born, he was British at that point. So I feel a strong sort of connection with Finland and Europe because of that, although I'm British. And then I followed my father a bit. I went into the electronics industry, I worked in semiconductors, and I ended up traveling around the world quite a bit. I loved Southeast Asia. I ended up living in Hong Kong for a while, then moved across to Singapore, and we sold semiconductors, semiconductors that were made in Swindon at the time. We used to have an electronics industry, and I loved being part of the Far East as well. And the thing that struck me so much about everybody I met around the world is how absolutely similar we are, and how our aims and what we want for our lives and the kind of justice we want to see and laws and rules are the same pretty much right across the world. So I saw that as very unified. And at that time, you know, we were part of the EU ourselves, so we had a nice large trading bloc of the EU to be able to negotiate with these countries and companies out in the Far East. Now, I met my wife, who's sat at the back here a bit, in Korea. We got married. I've got 2 children. They've grown up now. They've left home, which is giving us a bit more space. But they are effectively half Korean, quarter English, quarter Finnish. Yeah. Thank you very much. And And I see them as global citizens. One of them's living in Southeast Asia, in South Korea, teaching English as a foreign language. And now, so from an emotional point, I feel very connected with the people of the world. Now, I love Europe as a bloc, and I love my European citizenship. And I feel, and this is where I'm just talking about feelings, not facts, that that's been torn away from me against my will. I also feel that I would like to see things go in the other direction. I'm quite positive myself about a federal Europe. I don't see any problem with that. But I'd like to see Europe getting more involved and breaking down boundaries with Russia. I'd like to see larger areas working together. And I mean, my craziest dream is that we actually all end up just as citizens of the world with a set of rules and regulations for how we're trading and interacting with each other. So like a world justice court system, okay? And then I'm quite a fan of Donald Trump. I think his Space Force idea is absolutely fantastic, and that maybe we could have a federation between us and all the other planets that he's going to discover. But then I realized I was going a little mad. But my point, I can see people who've voted leave on an emotional level, that they feel that they've lost their sovereignty, that those people over in Brussels are making all the laws and the rules. When I try and dig in deeper and say, well, which laws are you upset about? I don't often get much of a reply. Then I say, well, which laws are you going to implement when we've come out that is going to make things a lot better? And I don't get much substance there. But I can see that those feelings are valid, and they do need to be addressed with communications, like the last speaker was saying, by talking to people and explaining our perspective. So I think that's just all I wanted to say. Thanks.